Gen Z fans are checking their phones 10 times a match. Don't know about Gen Z, I'm doing it myself.
To be honest, any sport outside of football is probably underserved when it comes to YouTube content.
Yeah, essentially, you can be rewarded for failure in American sport.
If you're not part of Gen Z, like I gave up Snapchat when I left uni. I mean, I guess just if your friends stop using it, then you stop using it, right?
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Attention Shift podcast. I'm Ed Abbas, and this week I've got me Andy Marston of Sports Pundit. Andy, welcome to the pod.
Cheers, Ed. Nice to be here.
Hi, everyone. Just before we get into the pod, I want to talk about some research we've just done. We surveyed 1,500 games across the UK, US, and Europe, and found that your fans want to spend more with you. You're just not giving them enough reasons to. To find out exactly how much revenue your organisation is leaving on the table and what to do about it, head to display.com/insights or scan the QR code on screen. Download the report and the guide. Both are free. Right, let's get straight into it. So, Andy and Jamie Murray have launched a new YouTube channel called The Set. And I think this potentially could be big for tennis. They launched it on the 24th of June, so we're only 5 days in with Prodigy Studios, who, as we know, have been working with the Overlap and The Switch featuring Kevin Peterson. The first episode they've done is Can We Turn KSI into a pro tennis player? So they've gone to a YouTube stalwart, as it were, to try and get some reach with the channel. They're accessing archive. And Andy said himself he's a big fan of YouTube and the content that is being created on there, like the Chambeau and the stuff that Kevin Peterson's done. So it's interesting that him and his brother, who are not necessarily renowned for having personality, I would say, have decided to lean in and go down this route.
Yeah, I mean, I think... Well, first off, we'll just clarify, it's Andy Murray you're talking about, not Andy Marston, when you say Andy's launched a YouTube channel with Jamie Murray.
True. You might.
Well, maybe, and it might be on the cards. Business of Tennis podcast, maybe. Maybe that's something to work on. But yeah, no, I think, in terms of personality, I think Andy Murray started to show towards the end of his career a lot more personality.
Yeah, true.
He became good friends with Nick Kyrgios, his friendship with Novak Djokovic became more visible as well. I think it started to come out a bit more. So I think he actually could be quite a good character for it. And then I also think the dynamic of having his brother will probably also just allow both of them to open up a bit more because it's somebody that you're going to feel more comfortable around. In terms of this launch, the thing that first kind of triggered in my mind, and obviously you mentioned it's the same producers. So obviously they've been, setting this up because Andy Murray went on Kevin Peterson's channel, probably 5 months ago, and did like a cricket challenge where it was like, can Andy Murray survive a 100-mile-an-hour ball off a bowling machine? So I wonder if that was I assume that was setting them up for then doing their own.
Yeah, it looks like
or it was giving them a taste of this is what you could have in tennis. And they've seen the success of it and gone, actually, go on then, we'll launch a channel. I mean, I'm not sure which one of the two it is. 5 months is quite a quick turnaround if that's kind of the ignition point. I would imagine it's more of a setup. But yeah, I think it's a smart move. I think, to be honest, any sport outside of football is probably underserved when it comes to YouTube content. So if you're going to get genuine access, which I guess they can both provide now that Andy's retired and I think Jamie's retired, or maybe
I think he has, yes.
They probably have the right amount of time to put into the show. So
yeah,
what was your take on what? Have you actually watched the full video? So curious.
Yeah, we were chatting about this, weren't we? I was obviously working at the weekend watching YouTube videos. Yeah, look, I think that you see, so Seb Lozardo, we know he's behind it as well, and he works a lot with Prodigy Studios as a YouTube strategist on this, and Seb came on Attention Shift pod a couple of weeks ago, so you can find that pod on our timeline. He's got a way of doing things, he's got a format, and you can see how much he leans into making sure that the video is discoverable on YouTube, first off by the thumbnail itself, the title, and I was having a look at the numbers yesterday, and I was thinking to myself, he's building slowly. I think it was on about 140,000 views yesterday, and I've just looked again, now it's on 220,000. So you can see this is going to build and build and build over the course of the next 7 days, and I wouldn't be surprised if it hits 1 million video views, which for a new video on a new channel is pretty good. Look, and they've gone and got KSI to do this, and they've also done the collab feature, where they've collaborated between KSI, The Set, and Wimbledon as well. So, look, timing just the week before Wimbledon as well, leaning into KSI, and obviously he's had some announcements recently in terms of his work with the Sidemen as well, or not anymore. I think the format really, really works. I think to your point, Andy's got that dry sense of humour, right? He's not your sort of natural comedian as a personality. And I think it does work, and I think it does balance off with KSI in this particular instance. And what Andy has got is, throughout his tennis career, he's been one that has stood up for people that didn't necessarily have voices. And I think that has ingratiated him with the tennis community, which means he can absolutely get to anyone he wants to come and be part of this. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing stuff with Serena, who he's done a lot of stuff with in the past, and they played doubles together. He can go to any tennis personality in the world and bring them into this channel, and I think that's going to give him a massive head start on anyone else who's going to decide to do anything.
Yeah, no, so that's what I thought was probably most interesting, was like the choice of guest for the first episode. Obviously going with someone like KSI, and then being able to do a collaboration where you can push it across the channels. Obviously Wimbledon is smart timing in terms of I'm actually off to Wimbledon later today. It's work. It's like you watching YouTube videos at work.
I'm going to Liverpool this afternoon.
But no, I think him not picking a tennis player for the first episode I think was interesting, because obviously with Peterson, I think what's worked very well is obviously Peterson knows a lot of people across the cricket landscapes, played with a lot of people, and he's very much lent into getting current and former players onto the onto the show. And I think, someone like KL Rahul, for example, I think was the first episode, which went over 1 million. Obviously, cricket's got this huge benefit from a numbers perspective, in that there's a lot of people in India that love cricket and will watch anything that involves their national team star players. I don't know if tennis has that to the same degree, but I think what will be interesting from this is, I think, obviously tennis tried to go down the Drive to Survive route and launch its own documentary series.
Yeah, and it was okay, but there was nothing fundamentally.
Well, it just wasn't different enough. I
yes,
guess. And I think also the glamour of F1 is attractive to people, whereas that maybe there isn't quite the same level of glamour on an ATP tour where you're living out of a hotel room, and there's just a lot more kind of.
It did feel a bit same. We're in a hotel room again. Yeah, I know what you mean.
But I think the benefit of shows like that is driving and showing off the personalities within the game. And I think Andy is going to be a great judge of character as to whose personality would be worth kind of showing off. And so I think if people start to see, having the mix of YouTubers, which then drives kind of maybe general sports fans on YouTube to the channel, but then also having the kind of hardcore tennis fans that maybe want to see more of the personalities of the top players. Because I would say right now that's probably the challenge that tennis has, is illustrating the characters and the stories. Because obviously you've got Sinner and you've got Alcaraz at the top. Sinner is very focused on his tennis, doesn't really give you a lot outside of just being a very, very straight-laced professional. And so I think if you could start to show off some of the personalities, because there will be personalities to those players, and maybe they'll feel comfortable doing that with an ex-pro like Andy, versus going onto a YouTuber's set and having to kind of play up for the cameras.
No, I agree. I think that leaning into that culture, lifestyle, that crossover audience. I was chatting to Tony Pastor from Goalhanger this weekend, actually, in terms of what they've been doing with the rest of football for the World Cup, and the fact they've had people like Gordon Ramsay on and Niall Horan. Is that the whole point there is to try and get that crossover audience, and you can see that Andy's done that with KSI as his first guest, and it'll be one of those. They'll have tennis pros, and then they'll have people from outside of the game. They've got an interest in the game, but no, look, it's interesting. Shall we go on to the next story? So the BBC and Sidemen watch along. So interestingly, BBC have openly shared their World Cup rights with the Sidemen collective. They did it for the Ecuador-Germany game that was simultaneously on the BBC YouTube channel as well. So we've got that. Again, that's similar, using that collaboration function within YouTube itself, which gives them hundreds of millions of combined subscribers. Interestingly, the viewing numbers weren't that high for it, but you could argue it was Ecuador, Germany, and his people in the UK are going to be massively interested in that game. But they were always going to pick a game like that, I think, because they're not going to give the truly premium right for this. But it was interesting that the BBC have lent into this as well, to do something like this, because it's not their natural place to play, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, as a public kind of service, its job is to get its product or get its content in front of as many people within the UK as possible. And so, like, it kind of does have the duty, I think, to experiment. And I think the BBC in general has actually been pretty early on a lot of innovations when it's come to broadcast media. I mean, like, iPlayer, I feel like, was probably quite a long way ahead of the other TV channels when as it relates to kind of, like a streaming service. So I think they've actually done a fairly good job of it. I mean, like you say, Ecuador, Germany is a tough slog to try and get people interested in that. In a group where Germany's already through, and there isn't a whole lot to play for in terms of like relating that back to a UK audience. Maybe if it was winner of this game is going to get England in the knockout phase or something, then you can kind of try and tell a story around it. But I think it makes sense as a game because like you say, there's not really a lot to lose. They probably ran the numbers and were like, we're not going to get many people watching this, so why not try something new.
Yeah, Rich Johnson and I we did talk about the BBC in the last episode of the pod, actually, where we talked about a lot of the stuff they've done, because the BBC have been heavily criticised for their actual TV coverage compared to what ITV had done, where BBC decided to stay in Salford, but ITV have gone out and really splashed the cash in New York. But we were looking more at what they've been doing from a digital engagement perspective and the amount of things that they've done within the BBC Sport app, which, look, I genuinely would notice anyway, because a BBC Sport app is my go-to for from sort of day-to-day news updates and things like that. And look, and they have done a lot of things, and that some things work, some things don't, but it's always easy to criticise the BBC because the reality is they're not afraid to fail. And some would argue they've got the budget to do that too, right, being a public service broadcaster. But they have certainly driven things forward in a way that I've not seen ITV do with their digital offerings for this World Cup. So the fact that they decided to go down the road of doing this too, I'd like to see all of those things connected up better than they are at the moment. Again, and we covered that last week. But you can see that they've certainly tried to do some different things. And look, they've made a call that TV coverage, in a sense, is less important to them than distribution via Sidemen and interactivity engagement via their digital platforms.
Yeah. Do you know on the collaboration here whether it was they were just streaming the exact same thing across both channels, or whether it was just like they lent their rights to the Sidemen to do their own watch along? Because I would be curious whether, like, you wouldn't want to necessarily impose the watch along on everyone that wants to watch that game. You'd probably want it as like you've got your vanilla broadcast over here for your general football fans to watch it, but then also you can go to Sidemen and watch their version.
Yeah, I think this was YouTube on. I think it was picture in picture as well on the YouTube channels. But at the same time, obviously, if you wanted to then go and watch the game itself, you go and watch it in the iPlayer or on TV, and they weren't necessarily featured within that because this was very much a YouTube player. So you had your options, because like you said, there's going to be a certain kind of audience who are going to go, I don't even know who these people are, and I certainly don't want them interfering with my viewing pleasure, because some people just want to watch the game as it is with the comms as it comes and not take on board all the other things that get pushed at them. So I think we are in that world now, right, where public service broadcasters and traditional media in general are starting to catch up with the kind of things that they need to do to engage younger audiences. And there's been quite a bit of criticism recently, actually, even in the House of Commons, where media select committees, where they've been talking about how the BBC needs to modernise how it thinks about distribution and making content for younger audiences, because otherwise they risk alienating. And then, as if by magic, this happened sort of 2 weeks later. So it's almost like it was timed. So, yes, you had different options to watch it in whatever flavour suited you. Yeah.
So I think I spoke about this with Drew on the pitch, this kind of concept of having, like, multiple watch-alongs. So, like, I could see a world whereby you have the central rights owner of the media, but then they basically say, like, we're going to basically hand out licenses to 10 different creators that are all going to have their own spin on it. And then people basically pick the flavour that suits their interest level. So like, because I would say, sticking with the BBC for a sec, like when they stream the NFL in the UK, obviously they have to, because they're trying to serve the mass market, they have to go down quite a like quite a beginner level kind of like explanation for the NFL, because they have to assume that most people watching haven't watched an NFL game before, don't really know the rules. I can imagine if you're an American living in the UK and that's your only way to watch the game, it's probably quite frustrating. So having like, I don't know, an expert channel where like people that want to watch it kind of in high fidelity with like, very technical insights, that could be one option. Another could be the Sidemen. Another could be the beginner channel. Another could be with a creator that's more speaking about the celebrities that are in the crowd, and they're not even talking about the football for most of it.
I think we are absolutely going down that road now. We're actually doing some work with Volleyball World at the moment, where we're working with a number of creators around the world, where depending on rights, in some territories where broadcast rights have been handed to a media company, the creators are getting a suite of tools which has allowed them to have more data and more access to narratives than they would have previously. And they're doing watch-alongs to their audiences, whereas in some territories where there is no media deal, they're actually giving the creators access to the live streaming itself, with all those other tools too. So it allows you to, again, in the fragmented world we live in, as you say often, use different ways to distribute to different audiences at different times. So it's starting to evolve more and more in the way of doing things. And I think we're going to see that over the next 12, 18 months. You'll see a lot more of that, without a doubt. The biggest events of the year are gold mines for publishers, and Display's new research shows you exactly how to cash in. We analysed over 30,000 comments across the US election, the World Cup, the Met Gala and more, uncovering 8 ways audiences engage, so you can package, price and sell your content and own the conversation, whether you have broadcast rights or not. Head to display.com insights to download Harness the Hype today. So, this is more sort of statistical story that we got here. So Gen Z fans are checking their phones 10 times a match. Don't know about Gen Z, I'm doing it myself. It's not a distraction. It's just, I guess it's just how we've trained ourselves now to ultimately consume content, right? We are watching what we are watching at the same time. We're doing other things too, whether that's chatting with our friends or engaging with something like the BBC example that we've used there. But this new Snapchat research among 1,000 UK Gen Z fans during World Cup finds that they're checking their phones 10 times, with 46% checking during natural breaks and 74% reaching for their phones during the scheduled 20-second minute water breaks that everyone's doing at the moment. I guess it's not rocket science for us to be told this, right? But it's interesting that someone's decided to go and do this research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm surprised it's not higher, to be honest.
I'm definitely doing more than 10 times.
Yeah, and also like only 75% are reaching for their phone during the water break. I would imagine it's like 95%. But
what are the other 25 doing?
I would assume the 25 that aren't are watching it in the pub, maybe.
Yeah, fair.
Or like, I guess maybe that number would be higher if ITV and BBC had chosen to do actual ad breaks versus tactical analysis, because they are still providing some level of value to the fan in that break. So it's not like a completely clean break.
It's not felt as exactly. Us sat here in the UK, it's not felt as intrusive as perhaps it would have done I can only imagine in America that it's just ads in those breaks and they cut straight to it. Whereas here, like I said, they've used it as an opportunity to do more tactical analysis. So there is something there to keep your interest maintained.
Yeah. I mean, I think the point around checking the phone, like, and the point around just like the group chat almost being that second screen activation is something that I don't think necessarily gets enough coverage when you think about how much time is given to discussing YouTube, discussing Roblox, but actually WhatsApp and Snapchat as kind of like fan engagement tools, I think are probably underappreciated by rights holders. Like you don't hear.
Yeah, there's a disconnect. They happen in isolation rather than connected.
Yeah, you don't hear as many like rights holder strategies around like what they're doing to drive the group chat discussion on Snapchat or WhatsApp. Like I remember having an interview with Dan Porter from Overtime, and like everything related back to like how does this translate through to the group chat. Yeah. And with Snapchat as well, like I think if you're not in Gen Z, obviously they're the ones that did this research. If you're not part of Gen Z, like I gave up Snapchat when I left uni. I feel like it would almost, I mean, I guess just if your friends stop using it, then you stop using it, right? So, but the numbers behind Snapchat are insane. Like
Yeah.
the number of people using it. I think they had something like it's like 90% of 13 to 24-year-olds are on Snapchat.
Well, I asked Will I'd messaged Will, right, and he didn't get back to me. I'm like, why don't you get back to me, Will? He's in that sort of mid 25-year-old age range. He went, oh, sorry, I don't really check like WhatsApp that often or my messages that often. I went, oh, and I just sort of like delved into it a little bit, and he was like, oh no, basically I just use like me and all my friends, we just use Snapchat for communication. He said, I don't really have anybody's number. We just message on there. That's how we communicate.
Yeah, yeah, it threw me. There was a piece of content that came out during the Women's Rugby World Cup where it's like three of the players sat around getting asked questions about each other, and it was two quite young players. I think maybe they'd just joined the squad, and then one player that was more senior, and she mentioned that she used WhatsApp, and they burst out laughing and basically started making fun of her for being old, and I was
Wow.
like. And they were like, and she was like, "Wait, you don't use WhatsApp?" And they're like, "No, we just use Snapchat." And I was like, "This is the best ad for like it wasn't an ad
Yeah.
for Snapchat, but it was the best ad for Snapchat." I'd have been like clipping that and putting that everywhere. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a slept-on platform. They're getting some heat at the moment, Snapchat, for their hardware. But I think from a messaging platform perspective, it's a hugely influential one. And I know the FA has done quite a lot with them to launch like lenses and stuff for this World Cup
Yeah.
to be like integrated into it. So
So I suppose the Snapchat story there, where you're saying about how there's not a lot of inconnectivity between those platforms in the moment and actually the owned platforms that media companies and even sports rights holders have themselves. So it's interesting on the next story what ESPN have started to do, which is something that I know we as a business bang on about all the time, where they're building their own first party fan identity platform. They're using flow code to do it, but ultimately it's pit polls, trivia, sweepstakes, brand integrations. They are trying to maintain the interest and acquire the audience that is anonymous to them watching on set-top boxes and things like that, but ultimately bring them into their digital environment there where they can start to understand who they are. So the player's always been in the past like, oh, we'll send them to socials and then they'll engage them. It's kind of like, yeah, but if you're sending them there to there, they're still anonymous to you. You don't know who they are. They've now realised actually the player needs to be, how do we bring them into our own environment and keep them there? So it's interesting they've done that. And look, and there's a lot of people behind this as well, between Publicis Sports and Disney Advertising. Feels like there's a lot of people involved in this that looks costly, even if I say that, that doesn't need to be for something that I certainly think is an obvious strategy to employ to maintain your audience, which is, again, we talked about the BBC doing it with their own app as well.
yeah, I guess the challenge is like you're getting more and more platforms all asking for data. And I
Yep.
think something that the sports organizations have themselves is a level of like unparalleled loyalty, right? Like if your football club is asking you for data, you're probably going to give it over. As more and more platforms though start to want it, I guess there's like an element of like, oh, not again. I have to go through another
Yeah.
like because if ESPN are doing it and then all the other channels copy, right? Like every time you want to watch something on TV, suddenly you're like, oh, I'm now getting put through this funnel. So I guess there's probably a element of like winner takes all for the top platforms, but for the smaller platforms, it might start to become a bit draining on the user if you're not providing enough value as
Well,
you
that's
go through
the
the
value
process.
exchange is key, isn't it? That and
Mhm.
what I hate to see is when these things are almost like, yes, you sent me from the content I'm watching to go and do this over here, and then I'm going to do this thing over here. But how is what I'm doing over here then actually driving the content that I'm watching? Like, is it interlinked in some way? Are you asking me to do something that then impacts what I'm watching? Because if you're not, you just send me somewhere else to do something almost in my own little bubble without it necessarily impacting. So there's stuff like when I see the BBC talking about, oh, go and do, QR code, go and do our predictor. But then I never see them making any content based on what the fans' predictions are. But then I see certain pundits droning on who are not very interesting at all. I think, God, you could have done a better job actually if you'd started using some of these content, start comparing to how the starting lineup that the pundits are going to pick themselves. There's not a lot of that happening, and again, I don't know what. Obviously, we don't know what ESPN strategy is going to be on this. But for me, And I've always thought about it like this. Look, you have Optas and you have Sport Radar that make sports data. This is fan-generated sports content that you could be using, because one of you tells you what the official narrative is, and the other one gives you feeling. And I think bringing that feeling back into the content would certainly help to give a better value exchange than people get right now.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't disagree with that at all.
If you're a creator who wants to build a career like the Sidemen or Emma Chamberlain, here's one to watch. You've built the audience, you've got the revenue. How do you take to the next level? Right now, everything you built depends on you showing up. To break out, you've got to look beyond the next upload. The creators building real businesses aren't just making better content. They're building assets that work without them. We've mapped out 4 phases which will turn you from a creator to a media empire. Read the guide, start building beyond the upload.
Okay, then last story. So, PGA, there's a lot going on in golf in the last week as well. So we'll start off with what PGA Tour are doing, but also what's going on with the Australian Open as well. So they are betting on a new narrative with a bit of a restructure. I say a bit of a restructure. It's pretty fundamental, really, because they're talking about introducing promotion and relegation, which is interesting, right? Because US sports organisations don't normally lean towards promotion and relegation. It's normally franchise model, which in a lot of ways it kind of has been, although players have been able to come in and come out through qualification. So for 2028, they're going to have a 2-tier championship series and a challenger series, where they'll have promotion and relegation between it. It's going to be 23 to 24 events, $20 million per each event, February to August. The top 90 players are retained and 20 are promoted annually from the Challenger Series. So I guess what they're doing here is they're formalising more the process of how a player gets in or gets dumped out, essentially. Mm-hmm. This is a big shift, right, for an organisation like this.
Yeah, it's a pretty big shift. I think it's a nice kind of hybrid towards the American model versus the European model, right? Because I think if you look at European football, there's a lot of people in America that will romanticize the relegation promotion. But then if you're an investor, there's not that much romantic about relegation. Maybe about promotion, but maybe definitely not about relegation.
Not about relegation.
So the fact that there's kind of like 2 tiers, but you can't, I mean, I'm not clear on whether you can get relegated out of the bottom tier or whether there's like an element of safety net at the bottom of the pyramid, because it reminded me a little bit of what USL have done. So United Soccer League, which is a competitor to the MLS, kind of seen as like a tier 2 soccer property in the US, has come out and launched promotion relegation in a bid to kind of differentiate itself from the MLS model. But essentially it's, I think, 3 tiers. So they've essentially just bracketed the clubs and said, like, you're never going to fall out the bottom the way you can in English football, where you just get relegated out the Football League and just spiral. There'll be kind of like checks and balances across the 3 so that you're, as an investor, you're protected still to some degree. But we're also now able to reward kind of like high performance. Because the challenge in American sport is it's like once you're in, it's very communist, right? So if you're at the bottom, you then get the first pick. So you're rewarded. So then the challenge that a lot of the top American leagues have is trying to disincentivize tanking, because if you're going to miss out on the playoffs, then actually you might as well finish last rather than 4th from last, because then you're going to get a better pick in the draft.
Yeah, essentially you can be rewarded for failure in American sports. We saw that happen with the Raiders, where they went out their way on the NFL base to make sure they did finish last to get the first pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it happened over like 15 years with the Washington Commanders, and yet the franchise value, because the whole league kind of rises, I think exited for like 6 or 7 billion, the Washington Commanders. So I think it's always a challenge. So I quite like it. I think the other thing that it does is it creates like competition in what would have been the middle of the pack, because suddenly people that would have been finishing kind of mid-range over a season could be winning events in the Challenger Series, building up their confidence, because you're kind of taking out the best players from the field, and then that allows them to come up to the bigger league, to the top league, and then see if they can compete. So it kind of creates maybe new narrative and new opportunity for people that would have finished in the middle to win competitions that they otherwise wouldn't be able to challenge for.
I think it's interesting as well that obviously there's some innovation that's gone on in broadly in golf over the last few years, and to give and I think you know about this with me, but give Liv some credit, right? What they have done is it's made people have to think about how they're going to do this and how are they going to make this sport more appealing to audience of today. And Bryson's had a big play in that too, in terms of the content that he's done. But Liv has certainly had an impact on this, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think Liv have innovated a lot and driven a lot of innovation across golf broadly, right? Like, if you look at the TGL as well, I think the team concept that's been leveraged in the TGL to raise quite significant money because it allows you to create these like investable assets, right? You can't invest in a player, but you can invest in a team that's owned or named after a player or owned by a player or that groups together a collective of players. So I think from an investment perspective, you know, the team concept that they've implemented, which I don't know whether there was already an idea or concept around that pre-Liv, but there's obviously some sort of validation.
Yeah, I think the Ryder Cup, everyone had always thought, can we turn this into something that's more regular because people love it so much?
Yeah. And I think the second part of what Liv has done really well is it's amplified the importance of other markets. So some of the places where Liv took the best players in the world weren't necessarily markets that received top quality golf on as regular a basis. And so, like, to go into another story that's recently happened, like Australia is one of those markets, for example, right? The Adelaide event that Liv put on looks epic. I haven't been to it, but like the images that come out of it, they get tons of people to it. There's a party kind of atmosphere. It's a bit like the waste management event that the PGA do as well. Like,
I've always wanted to go to that, but apparently they've toned that down a bit now.
Yeah, but like the PGA's just announced a formal partnership with the Australian Open, the Golf Australian Open, which essentially has said, like, we're going to kind of increase your standing within the calendar and make you a more significant event, which again, like, they probably won't ever publicly credit Liv with this, but I wouldn't be surprised if Liv has helped validate the Australian market to people at the PGA Tour, and they've gone, hang on a second, there's probably a case for us doing more in a market like Australia because there seems to be quite a big appetite for golf.
No, that makes sense, and I think again, it's always difficult to see what's actually going on in the moment, right, and whether things are going to make it. But then often other things come out of that particular process as well, which it looks like this has too. And I think we'll run out of time a little bit here, so we can touch on this a bit more next week, actually, because I think it's worth spending some time on to actually see what they're doing, do a bit more digging into it. So Andy, thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
really enjoyed it. Yeah. Hopefully see you again soon.
Great.
So thanks everyone for joining the Attention Shift Pod this week. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and if you want to feature as a guest, give us a question via our email at hello@attentionshift.media, or you can hit me up on LinkedIn. I've been Ed Abbas, and this has been Andy Marston. Thank you. If you enjoyed this conversation, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more videos just like this. And make sure you smash that bell icon too, so you're always the first to know exactly when a new episode drops.